Good evening, everybody. It is 5:01 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in beautiful Brooklyn, New York. My name is Max Cohen. I will be one of your hosts today for the MOCA Live podcast, and I'm really happy to be here. Joining me, as he does every week, the founder of the Museum of Crypto Art. Co-founder or founder? What do you prefer, Colborne? I've never asked you.
I don't really care. I just work here.
Somebody who works at the Museum of Crypto Art, Colborne Bell. Colborne, how are you today?
Mega founder.
I'm doing
Mr.
great.
Founder.
Thank you.
Excellent. And then joining us, our special guest for this week's episode of MOCA Live, one of my favorite people in all of crypto art, the co-founder of Dada.art, and by far one of the most instrumental individuals in the creation of modern crypto art, Miss Judy Mam. Judy, we are so thrilled to have you on the pod. Thank you for being here. How are you?
I am so thrilled to speak to you guys. You're some of my favorite people. I love you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah,
Love you.
our absolute pleasure, believe me. So one of the reasons, or there are many we could list all day for having you on the pod this week, is that you are releasing a book on the blockchain. This is a translation called Serves You Right, your new novel. That is a translation of Quien Te Manda, which you released last year in Spanish, and then have now translated for English speakers like me, which I appreciate. So we wanted to have you on to talk blockchain, of course, writing on the blockchain, data. I imagine we're going to get into a whole lot. So let's just start.
Yeah.
Underneath, on your kind of announcement page for Serves You Right, which you are releasing with Ferragosto, you said, "For me, it was essential to experiment with an innovative model for literary publishing consistent with my experience as co-founder of Dada. The art is by renowned Mexican crypto artist Mohara Gonzalez. Shout out Mohara. The concept design and editing are by Ismael Gomez Garcia, founder of Ferragosto. The UX design is by Alvaro Urquenzo. The English translation by you." Now, we've seen things like mirror.xyz where articles can be written and then minted as like collectible stories. And we've seen like Lit Project #1, which was Neil Strauss's Survive All Apocalypses, which is a PDF minted on the blockchain that was interactive. You can turn the pages. But I'm curious, like, what attracted you about the possibility of minting this book on the blockchain, especially because, to my knowledge and in my experience, we haven't really seen this be, it's not been unsuccessful, but it's been kind of unexciting to this point.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's all very new. It's still very early, and it feels to me very much like it felt in 2017 when Dada we tokenized the creeps and weirdos, and no one knew exactly if there was going to be a market. No one knew if there were collectors for this. No one knew that things would be costly or not costly. It was just an experiment, and I feel that it can do exactly, publishing books as NFTs can do exactly for, I think for literature or for the publishing industry, like what NFTs did for art. It just opens a whole new, different way of publishing that has a lot of, like, I think, advantages, like the same as in art, in a way, like, the publishing industry is like right now is basically controlled by giant monopolies. I think it's two gigantic monopolies.
Yeah, it's
all over
Penguin
the
Random
world.
House and Simon and Schuster, I think, and
Yes,
that's just
and
it.
I don't even know if one actually owns the other.
Yeah, they might.
It's just this, and it's not only in the English-speaking world. Actually, it's also in the Spanish-speaking world, and I don't know if in other places, but I am assuming. And so the same kind, with the creative people always have problems with gatekeepers. There's always the problem of, like, how do I get a book published? How do I get my art to be seen? How do I get my song to be heard? How do I, and I think Web3 is one of those places where at least there are different options. It's more peer-to-peer. It's about, for instance, for independent publishers that are struggling tremendously because they just cannot corner the market because everything is like cornered by these gigantic monopolies that don't take risks on new writers for the most part, that just keep like paying the big bucks to the big writers like, I don't know, Stephen King or whatever, that like it's like a crazy business of like what sits on a shelf of a bookstore. It's like a supermarket. It's that kind of really like muscle. So small imprints, young, like new writers, it's super hard. And when the reason why I thought about it is because my book was first published as a conventional paper book by Ferragosto, and it was actually Bea's idea, I have to say, because I wish I could take credit for this, but she said, like, you should publish this as an NFT, and I'm like, why didn't I think of that? But I went to Ismael, and I said, how about we publish this as an NFT? And this, like, the book, I believe, the paper edition, I think, was published in 2020 or 2021. I never know when anything happened, so please bear with me. The only thing that I know that happened was 2017. We tokenized the Crips and Weirdo. Everything. So in any case, when I said to him we should do an NFT, I didn't know if he was going to say, well, I don't know what an NFT is, or, oh no, like, NFTs are evil. And he didn't blink. He said, let's do it, because he happens to come from digital publishing, and he understands, like, also the limitations of digital publishing, which is basically, you get a license to read, you get a Kindle, and yes, you can have 500 books in your Kindle, and that is wonderful, but you don't own those books. You're basically renting a book. You can't really do anything. You cannot collect them. And it's also, like, apparently not like the greatest business model. So that entire industry, I think, is in dire need of innovation, and I feel that, books are really challenging because number one, no one reads. Number two, I mean, it's really difficult to get people to read, but not only that, but books, like, the files are different. It's a matter of how you present a book. And the reason why you may think it was unexciting until now, is because, yes, you could do a PDF that may have, like, some nice little bells and whistles. It's still a PDF. We, with Quientemanda, and also with Serves You Right, we tried to design a book, a digital book that is more, that is more exciting, that is more sexy, that has art in it. We intend to curate, I love this part because I'm partnering with Ismael also in this venture of Ferragosto NFT books. And I'm going to be curating the art that goes with the text that we eventually publish. And so it's a nice marriage of like subject matter and visual art. At the same time, we're going to be publishing the beautiful thing about being able to do this. You can publish a book, you can publish an essay, you can publish poems, as people have done very nicely and very excitingly, I think, like Sasha and the verse have done beautiful stuff with poetry. And so you can do, like, one short story. You could do installments. You could release chapters. There's a lot of, like, fun things that can be done, and also add a number of things, like we did with this book, like an animated cover, like an animated index. You could add all kinds of different digital files if you so wanted, like voice or like animation or some really nice digital design. So it's a different, it's still literature, it's still reading, but it lives on Web3. People can actually have a community around these books. And it will have the same kind, I hope, like the same kind of vibrancy that in the actual, like, book world you don't really feel, because it's kind of like ancient, like, okay, you go to a book reading and maybe the writer signs your book. That's the end of the story. The other thing that we want to do is we're going to be publishing stuff, but we also want to create, like, a marketplace to give independent publishers or publishers a contract in which they can mint their own books and have a storefront. And we've been talking to some of them. We went to the Guadalajara Book Fair last year to kind of, like, sense the like, sense how like the vibes were. And there was a lot of interest. And I've spoken to just a handful of people that I know that publish like normal books, like this art book, these people who publish these beautiful art books. And then there's this other guy that I spoke to that publishes a fantastic magazine on Mexican culture. And it's a very well-known magazine and everybody admires it. And when I told him, somebody introduced me as like, she does this publishing with NFTs, the guy almost basically like said, I need to talk to you, kind of thing, because it's a very difficult business. And so I'm not saying that this is not going to be a very difficult business, but we are in experimenting mode, and it's kind of fun to play around with it. And
Yeah.
so why?
I mean, experimentalism, I think, is so necessary because I'm so with you on the distribution mechanism of blockchain being so important for writers because of how gate kept the publishing world is. What I am uncertain about is the tech, right? The reality of reading is that it requires the experience has to be preserved, and that's why these things like Kindles and Nooks have so proliferated, because they give you some version of that same experience, right? It's hard, I imagine, from your perspective and also from mine. Like, if I wanted to, Serves You Right it's a novel, but it's broken up into pretty self-contained chapters. You can kind of like come back and pick it up, as I've been doing. I'm about halfway through. I imagine, what if you had a Tolkien-esque, giant novel with hundreds of chapters, right? That's not going to be able to translate to a desktop, right? We're relying as writers who are interested in blockchain on the advancement of technology, allowing for better, more accessible, more flexible experiencing of that writing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, and Colborne, please jump in if you have an opinion on this question, but like, what tools need to be released for writing to make a larger impact on crypto art, like and develop its place in the larger cultural ecosystem? Because my fear is that we'll have this writing, it'll be awesome, the writing will be top tier, but the actual experience of reading it is going to be difficult. It'll be me, going to the New Yorker website and reading a short story and being one of the few people that does that.
If I may, I think that, well, you got the kind of the galleys, the digital galleys of the book that you're reading. So you can tell me about your experience, and I would love your feedback. But the first challenge is truly like a very simple challenge, is the size of the files, right? Like, we do JPEGs. JPEGs are not heavy. The other stuff that when you want to do more convoluted stuff, then it's like a huge problem, like what platforms support this kind of files. So what needs to happen is like as much support of files of like big freaking sizes as possible. And even so, you can, I agree that like J.R.R. Tolkien or whatever it is going to be massive, but you could also kind of like do installments of, like Dickens used to do installments of his novels back in the day in magazines. So I think that yes, it's true that the tech needs to be a little more agnostic in terms of like the files. There needs to be better integration of that kind of stuff. I think that the reading experience, what we've tried to deliver is something an interesting reading experience, in that the beginning of the book, you see Mojarra's art, which is like really nice and animated. Then the index kind of like also animated with some beautiful art. But then once you get to the reading, it's really a very conventional way, because we didn't want to distract from the actual text. So you pass through the pages, you leaf through the pages, and you read a story. That's the choice that we made for this first book. There may be other ways to do it. I am not necessarily a fan of too many bells and whistles when it comes to like the text, but like everything in this space, everything moves really fast, but at the same time, real innovation is kind of like it's kind of a slog. So right now I don't know what has been innovated in terms of like the experience for the user in general. It's difficult, but again, I feel the kind of liberating thing about it is that because it's early, we can try things, and we can test, and we can make mistakes, and we can also figure out ways to present these books in the best possible way, so that to make it, yes, it's true. Like for instance, you can read the book on an archive link that anyone can read. We're not talking gating this book, so you can collect it, but you can also, it's going to be there for everyone to read. And then of course, like if you, for that you need basically internet service. If you're on a plane or if you're somewhere without internet, unless that you kind of like, I don't know if have, I don't know if it would work without that, but that's kind of like the limitation of digital life. I mean,
Yeah.
it that doesn't worry me so much as the fact that we are also kind of beholden to certain platforms, like for instance OpenSea, that has very limited, like,
Boo.
boo 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 boo, period, and so it's like, oh my god, to make it look good, it's an issue to make, this, I chalk it up to, we're still developing even 5 years. I've been here for 5 years. I'm like, when is of usage, when,
Yeah.
uh, but
It has to be incremental by nature. Colburn, have you had any experiences with blockchain based writing? And if so, like, can you pick out any positive ones? Again, like, it's been so hard for me as a writer in Web3 to find an avenue for putting out writing that feels, I don't know, true to the medium itself.
Yeah, I think the earliest experiments were Crypto Mag, the wonderful guy at Crypto Magazine, FOMO Magazine, people doing digital art in digital magazines, and they're brilliant. They're on the blockchain, they're collectible. And, that was exciting. And of course, all the innovation people like Sasha Stiles did, Ana Maria Caballero, and the whole verse crew, really, that was a surprise for me. I was very concerned with visual arts, and to see other people just use the technology to record. And this is when Max, we were just talking about the breadth of crypto art. That's for me when it gets really exciting.
yeah, and
Totally.
to be honest, actually, they were very inspiring to me. Like what I saw, the verse at the very beginning, that they were doing poetry on the blockchain. I was thinking, well, poetry makes sense because it can be short. It's like, it's not always short poetry, but you can do it in like short bursts, and it doesn't require a lot of like file size. But the idea that people can actually collect poems, that you can read poems, that you can play around with poems, and they have been evolving it. Now they're using a lot of AI, but that was inspiring to me. I thought, well, if poetry can happen, then literature can happen. It doesn't have to be
Sure.
poems. It can be other genres.
Well, it's
So
yeah, sorry.
Well, that is where it gets pretty exciting for me, as I've been going back through the Arrowid experiences database of all these people on all sorts of hallucinogenics and interpreting them as videos with AI. So, when you begin to take the story building that is happening in print and putting a visual language to it that could be co-created with you as a reader or stylized, that for me seems to be very forward. And I consider all of these, texts to be databases to later be interpreted, as we've found, building the virtual curator on top of your writings, Max. That seems to be a new frontier.
Sure. It's all, to me, long form art that is still trying to figure out its place on the blockchain. Short GIFs, short video files. But when we talk about like narrative television or narrative film or narrative video or any kind of long form video that requires, again, it's not just the file size, it's the ease of accessing and experiencing that thing when you can't cast an NFT to a television, or when you can't, download a book onto a Kindle or some kind of like handheld reader. Something you said before, Judy, that got me thinking is building a community around writing the way we can around art. And I think about the very beginnings of data, right? Where you had these long planes where people were drawing and then building off others' drawings and having this kind of like collaborative effort to create this like great whole. And it would seem to me that the equivalent experience in writing, that's very hard to come by, right?
Yeah.
Having multiple people contribute to an ongoing story.
Mhm.
But there's a possibility there that we can combine some kind of like the fan fiction essence. We spoke about this last week, but like this gargantuan underground world of fan fiction with being able to link things together on chain. I mean, is writing too personal rather to be approached from like multiple angles at once, or can you jointly, collaboratively, communally build some kind of written output?
Yeah, I don't see why not. Like, to be honest, and you tell me you're a writer too, so you know it comes from writing is kind of a lonely occupation in a way. But I guess so is making visual art. You're in front of your canvas, whatever it is. You're by yourself, and you're putting everything in there or out there. And the same happens with writing. I think all of these things can completely be explored. I do believe that I mean, in data we have a whole system that the data platform still exists. You can still draw in that way today, and 10 years after the fact it's still going on. But to do, like, people have done this kind of games, like almost like surrealist writing was somebody wrote a line and then the other person wrote a line, like an exquisite corpse but with words. Lots of things can happen. I don't know, I mean, for me personally, I would have to feel very comfortable with a group of fellow writers where we could really play around with something. I don't know how exactly what would the criteria be for that, but it can be a really fantastic, I think, exercise in co-creation of a story. I've written screenplays, none of them produced, but I've attempted writing screenplays, and I've always done it on my own. But I've gone to workshops where people give you, like they give you feedback, and sometimes that feedback almost are telling you what you should do or whatever. And there's people who write in teams, like great teams of screenwriters, like Billy Wilder wrote with, like, I don't know, he had some amazing collaborators. To me, I think that's kind of hard. But not because I'm unable to do it, but I think it has to be like the right dynamic, the right chemistry, the right kind of, like, this very playful, very loose kind of thing where you're not intimidated and you just go like, let's go for it. So that would be interesting. But, like, I may sound a little bit more conventional, but what I'm interested in is to bring reading and literature to this space. So, for instance, what Colborne was describing about, like, this AI stuff, all of that, it doesn't matter, like what you're describing, the experiments that Sasha and Anna and all those poets are doing. To me, it brings people back to reading. And as long as it brings people attention to, I could read something that is not only 240 characters, or that is not, like, that is not like some attention span, for the attention span of a gnat kind of thing. To me, that's already applause. And so if it brings that kind of excitement back to literature in some way, and also, like, giving opportunities to writers like you, or to people who are interested in writing. We believe, like, we're not saying, okay, everybody come and write and this is going to be Rarible for books. It's not going to be like that. I do believe that editorial curation is important. Anybody can self-publish today. I could self-publish in Amazon, and so can you, and so can you. But I think that for me, it was important to have the validation of somebody who looked at my work and said, I like this novel, and I'm gonna publish it. I'm going to bet on it. So that's what we would be doing also for writers. But the wonderful thing is that it can be in more than one language. It can be short, it can be longer. We can play around with the formats and kind of make it, to me, it's a creative explosion. It really is what it is.
Totally. Visual art is so momentary and experiential. When I wrote about Daim Al-Yad, I think that was last year, I came across a lot of his art that was purposefully slow art, and it would envelop and change slowly over time. which I thought was so interesting because obviously it flies in the face of like the glitchy X copy art, which is so look at me, look at me, look at me, move on to the next thing. If you haven't seen it, there's a piece that Daim created called Ancestral Memory, which is just gorgeous and well worth everyone's time listening if you want to seek it out. Colborne, I'm curious, is there a way to jive the fact that we have such a glut of art that requires and demands like immediate experience, and then kind of like that again, immediate experientialism of visual art with the longer, more exaggerated investment of time that any kind of long form writing requires, or are the two things necessarily at odds with each other?
I don't know. I think there's a reason that, you know, we create audio content more and more, and people are here listening and wanting to see and interact. These are by far, I think, our most popular content channels. And you know, I don't want to say like writing is dying, but we know everything is moving in this hyper fast lane where we continue to rewire our brains, and it gets more difficult as a person to go into that more solitary state when we want to feel so constantly connected. And just to sit down and concentrate is really, really difficult.
Yeah,
it is. And that's like, I think that we're being kind of stubborn in that sense, because we tend to forget that it's a very pleasurable experience. We have, you know, like I when I finally pick up a book after looking at all my social media and going through all the blah, 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 I'm like, oh wow, you know, it's so relaxing in a way. It engages your imagination. It's a moment of time that you kind of like are concentrating on just one thing, and in a way it's kind of like a conversation with the writer, because the writer is describing things, and or in fiction, let's say, you know, like characters and situations and places, but your brain is putting all the color. You know, your brain is deciding how this character looks like, or like what does this remind you of. So it's extremely fabulous. It's a really creative. Reading is creative, you know, and so it engages your imagination, even though you're thinking it sounds like it's passive, or it may feel like it's passive, but it's extremely engaged. It's the most engaged thing. Like, I love movies, right? And I love going to the movies, and when I'm at a movie, I'm completely transported, and I'm thinking, and I'm like trying to figure out, like, did the butler did it or not, you know, or whatever. But reading is almost like it's it engages more, because you make all these images in your head, you know.
It's participatory.
You take the words and you translate them into your imagination. So we are kind of adamant that we're going to try to remind people that this is an option, that reading is an option in your busy life, you know, that may be very enjoyable.
So there's a bit about the book, and I want to talk about the book itself as well. And it's very much about class. I'm really excited to ask you this question. So the book is really about class, and like how class is very obvious, like on someone's face. And there's a scene in, I think, chapter 3 or 4, where there's like this great outdoor area, I think outside of a school, and you're kind of describing all these different like socioeconomic classes of people that are within this one sphere, but they're all very disconnected from each other. Right? They're observing each other, but there's no integration, and they're all very clearly delineated. And I thought, wow, that sounds like crypto art, where, you know, we're all in this great commons, and you have the, you know, I'm going to use the word with heavy air quotes, but like the royalty, these people who are well known to everyone, who are manifesting magnificent sales. They all seem to have relationships with each other. And then you have these other people who are struggling very mightily to have their work known at all. You have the thinkers who are over on one side. And I'm curious, like, Colborne and Judy, I'd like both of your thoughts on that. Colborne, perhaps you can start us off, but like, how do you see that manifesting in crypto art yourself, this like class segmentation?
Wow, what a wonderful question. Have the rich been chased? I don't know. You kind of see some of these things where there is still, of course, massive pandering to capital, right? Which is kind of just sad, but it's, the nature. But at the same time, there is perhaps there is a performatory element online that I don't want to say removes, but obfuscates class. So there could be people that are performing as if they were one thing. And I think largely it tries to be reductive to the spirit of the movement, which is more human, more absurdist, but more democratic and egalitarian. And I think people who tend to posit themselves in classist ways kind of get torn down, or can get torn down by the artists. They sniff that out really quick.
Yeah, interesting point. I mean, it makes me think. We were talking about Art Gnome's 2018 article, "What is Crypto Art," the other day, and he talks about dankness as like the aesthetic underpinning of crypto art, right? And how you have all of these geographies and all these cultures, class, race, creed, age, and what matters most at the end of it is just the success of the individual artwork itself. But crypto art is so contextual. It's the
But
context. Yeah.
it's interesting that you make that analogy, because I mean, I'm talking about like class structure in Mexico and Mexico City, which is extremely rigid. But the world is a hierarchical place everywhere. You see this same thing in, this scene that you described takes place at the campus of a private university. It's a private school. Most people who go there can afford to pay the tuition, but they also have like some of the people who get scholarships, and everyone is in their canton, right? Everyone is in their clique, because this is the world is like when you're 7 years old, there's already a clique. There's already the popular girls and the not so popular. I mean, somehow it's human, and like God knows that people have tried for centuries to get rid of it, and for some reason it remains. And when you have like a space that is very market driven, where like it's also a very new space where maybe first movers then get a lot of attention, or people who know how to like have a lot of followers. There's always going to be an asymmetry, of the people who have more, who know how to milk the medium better than people who may be very talented but don't exactly know how to communicate successfully on Twitter, because they don't speak the language. So I find there's a part of it that I can see about like, oh, these people here and those people there and the OGs. But there's a part of it that I also like to ignore. And I think that because we're all kind of like communicating digitally, and you can be in the completely different side of the world. I don't know how you live. I don't know if you're loaded or if you don't have 1 cent in the bank. There's a part of it that it is a little bit more, that it levels people in a way. And then there's the part that we create ourselves with our little cliques and our little, enthusiasms for some people, but not for others, stuff like that.
Certainly.
I don't think we can, I don't know that can be changed. But I do think that even so, the crypto art space is a place where kind of you get to meet the diversity of people, and because everything is kind of very on the surface, sometimes you don't know even the actual name of the person or where they're actually based. There's a certain, I think to me, there's a certain more horizontal structure in that.
Yeah, I guess it depends on where you're looking. This just evoked a repressed memory in me where I know it was very strange as you were speaking. I had this memory of being in middle school, and we were given this task to like describe in one word, like label all the lunch tables in the cafeteria. And I remember being brought to the guidance counselor because I had labeled the table that I sat at outcasts. And this woman was very concerned as to why I had distinct labels and everyone at my table was an outcast. And I had completely repressed that memory. But
that's wonderful.
But even with the flatness and this quote unquote like egalitarianism, like, on any given GM post, right? If it's some big artist or some big collector and they say GM, the people who move the market, the people who are influential, they'll get the likes, they'll get the responses from this person, and the rest of the people will be shouting into the void kind of in vain. And again, maybe that's just the nature of the thing. So perhaps we don't need to.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think this is what Dada has been trying to avoid for the, like we try to do something where it's less of that, and we treat everyone more equally, and all of that. It's very difficult. It's not impossible. I think people tend to not to be followers in the sense that it feels comfortable to follow what someone else is following. It feels, you want to feel like you belong. And in the end, we're all still in middle school. That's the sad, that's the sad reality. We are, like we may have progressed in some way, but inside we're still smarting from the girl who didn't invite us to her, like, whatever party, and for the guy who didn't, like, look at us, whatever. So
Yeah.
it's like a giant Web3 middle school. That's where we are.
Well described. So slightly different topic, but still related to the book. So writing in Spanish or working in Spanish, as so many people in the space do. I mean, we speak all the time about Crypto.org, Crypto Argentina, that is, and all the people doing incredible work in like South America, non-English speaking countries. Like, it just strikes me as so frustratingly difficult because, like so much of the traditional art world, crypto art's language seems to be English. And it takes place predominantly in these same spheres, right? America and European-centric landscapes. So you released this book last year in Spanish, and now you've put out the English-speaking version. I'm curious, like, why were you compelled to translate this? And do you think it'll have a different impact in a different language?
Well, I'm really curious about that myself. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the readers, but we really, we insisted on doing it in Spanish. I could have translated and done it in English and gone out with the English first and then done the Spanish, because the market is in English and everybody speaks English. But we really felt that it was important to honor the original book and to do this in Spanish, to say, this is Web3. It's a global thing. Not everything has to be in English. And so we did. And it's interesting because just the fact that I am announcing it now with its English title, and I can see that there's more engagement, and it has surprised me, but I shouldn't be surprised because it's logical. If you see that something is in a different language, well, of course you go. It's not that you're not interested, but you quickly switch to what you understand. So I'm curious if, like, this book is about Mexico City, it's about class structure, it's about racism, it's about, Mexican culture. But at the same time, it's a very universal story of like a love. It's a love story between two people. And I'm really curious to see what the impact is in terms of how people get it or not. But at the same time, I think that I can already feel that there is more, just in terms of numbers of people, there's more interest because it's in the language that most people speak. So I thought it was important to translate it because, again, also what a writer wants in this world more than anything else is for people to read what you wrote. It's not to sell, I don't know how many books. It's not, it's what as many people as possible to read the stories that you're telling. So I thought, we thought it would be good to translate it to English. And it was kind of a bit of a challenge, the translation. And I also would love to hear from you how you feel about it, because the book is written in Spanish, but with a lot of Mexican slang, a lot of it. And so translating slang into English, sometimes there are really great equivalents, and sometimes it's just not. It just may lose a little bit of that richness. You try as hard to find something that has the same kind of like texture and pungency, but it's not always. It is a different language, so
yeah,
I'm curious.
I will tell you, one of my pet peeves in literature in general is when an artist or a writer rather uses words that are not in English, puts them in like within hyphens or within em dashes and then translates it immediately after. And I appreciate you not doing that and just letting kind of the Spanish kind of sit for the most part, because it forces you to kind of realize and ground yourself in the world that it's in. So I appreciate that just with my own
Thank
sensibilities.
you.
Let's talk about,
You
yeah.
say it because one of my pet peeves is like there are books by people who like Hispanic writers or like Latino writers that they use a lot of Spanish, and sometimes like it's, you know, the book is in English but it's a lot of Spanish, and I think, you know, yes, it's good, but there's a kind of a nice balance to strike between using the expressions in Spanish that are absolutely key, or that you know that people understand because people will understand because of the context. But thank you for doing that, because it's challenging to translate. You want people to understand the entire context and the, you know, the richness of the references and everything, but you don't want to treat the reader like they're 2 years old and you need to kind of feed them everything, you know.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I get it. So I want to change gears quickly and talk about sex, because this book is, this book is very much, that was a funny face, Colborne. This book is very much about sex, and crypto art is totally anesthetized when it comes to sexuality. And a lot of that has to do with Twitter and the fact that like Twitter de-incentivizes outward displays of eroticism. Colborne, you and I spoke with Pollyanny a couple of weeks ago, and through that conversation, it became even clearer than it was clear previously that outward eroticism is not usually met with acceptance or popularity. It is kind of pushed away. And the kinds of eroticism and sexuality that we see in crypto art is usually in a very like, I don't know, classical marble sculpture kind, right? It's like male photographers or people like Nude Yoga Girl who are there's innuendo, but there's never the thing itself. So this is a loaded question in terms of verbiage, but why is it so dangerous in crypto art to engage with sexual content, and why are you, pun intended, thrusting forward regardless so powerfully?
Well, I think visual, really, I think there is a big difference between visual explicit content and something that you have to read. Because reading, again, everything takes place in your mind. If you want to, you know, if you can be prudish about it, you can be shocked about it, but it's an internal process. But I think that if you do overtly sexual or erotic content, I think one, I mean, I don't know, like I think of Una, for instance, that actually it's not, you know, it's not that it's erotic content, but she's actually making a statement about like the, you know, the commodification of women, the commodification of art, of boobs, of whatever. So that's super interesting. As a woman, I wonder, like, being that this is kind of like the Wild West in terms of like people being anonymous and trolls and stuff like that, I could understand if it's a little bit scary because it feels very unprotected. Now, I think I've seen work like you know, you remember Yu from in Korea, that he does this amazing, very sexual. He's like tableaus, like with all kind of masters paintings, but he inserts himself as this amazingly sexual being in this, and I think they're amazing. So I think that as long as it's not, you know, as long as it's art in a way, as long as it has a meaning, like when you does what Una does, and I'm not that familiar with other people, then it's worthwhile. Because it should be part, you know, eroticism is part of art, and there's no reason why it shouldn't be there. The thing is, like, we also live in a space where, like, there's a great tolerance for really shitty art. I'm sorry, you know, there's a great tolerance for totally lazy ass shit that is not art, and so everything is called art. And so it would be, you know, you have to have a certain, you know, accepting that kind of erotica that is truly, like, I don't know, high quality, is a different level. It's not going to be a pudgy penguin, you know. It's not going to be like you know, whatever, you know, like,
now you're making me think.
yeah. But in terms of writing, that's a great thing, you know. It's a book. So it's words on a page, and it's whatever that effect has on your mind. I would just like to say that the reason why there's sex in the book is because, since this is a book that is like critical of a society that is very hierarchical, very rigid, where very like sexually repressed, the only way in which these characters can actually express themselves, their love for each other, that it has to be through that. And that's where they realize that they're not that different from each other, that there is a relationship that the entire rest of the world simply does not accept. So there's a reason. It's not, it's not gratuitous, but I kind of like wanted to be explicit, because I feel that in Mexico no one ever talks about these things. And what Lucia says at some point in the novel, she says, like the first time she actually, when she pops her cherry, she's like, I'm sure everybody does this, but no one talks about it. She's like kind of shocked. It's like, okay, this, because there's no talking about it. So that was one of the things that I was exploring in with the book. And I think it's interesting because it makes people a little nervous. It makes people jittery.
Mm-hmm. Colborne, do you think that there can ever be an openness to eroticism in crypto art if it remains sequestered on Twitter?
I mean, it seems to mostly be like, maybe it's just North America's relationship with sex is so prudish, or maybe this is some legacy of
don't leave out Great Britain.
Yeah, I don't know, man. You start to travel the world and you start to begin to understand how other cultures, people think about sex, and you're like, what is going on in the heads of Americans? It's fed as so taboo, and it's fed so commercialized that, like money, power, and sex are the holy triumvirate of, American exceptionalism. And it's just like, it's natural. And until we begin to move past all of this shame, and return to like, but it is, of course, it's embedded in our media and it's embedded in our tech. And the more they get people to feel ashamed of it, the more likely people are going to, consume around it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like, you think America is prudish, like, have I got news for you? I mean, it feels to me that Mexico is more so in a way, but what is interesting is, for instance, if you look at American movies, in the 70s, there was sex in American movies. And, like, it's shocking today when you see those 70s movies, you go, what? This would never be made today. I don't know for how long you can't find a sex scene in an American film. And that that is, I bring that up because that is a perfect barometer of what you're talking about, is the temperature of the culture. And the more corporate is the culture, the less sex there's going to be, because there's no room. The more, like, sex is freedom in the end. Like, say what you do with your sexuality, as long as it's consensual, it's no one can take away. It's like freedom of thought. It's the last bastion of freedom, in a way. This is why religion is always trying to prevent it, circumscribe it, make it feel like it's a terrible thing, because they cannot control it. And so the way to control it by corporate standards is basically not to show it, is to completely obliterate any of it. But on the other hand, like, then there's that entire industry of, like, porn that is, I find, quite appalling, that everybody has to go see in their incognito Google or whatever, and it's like, it's under the surface, because as Colborne says, there's no real, there doesn't seem to be like a more, I guess, a more transparent or a more honest way of talking about it, and of actually exploring it. So
in Iron Man, the 2008 movie, Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man, and he's this playboy, and he has obviously it's not graphic because it was a PG-13 movie, but there's like directly implied that he has sex with this reporter. And this was before Disney took over the Marvel franchise, and to this day, that's the only
Yeah.
moment in which there was like actually implied sex in any Marvel movie. All of these characters and a lot of the celebrities that we have in the US too, they're completely like desexualized. I think maybe that's why so many people love reality television, like The Bachelor and things like that, where it's there, it's a part of it. I mean, it's displayed a little bit trashier than I think is necessary, but part of sex is trashy, and that should be celebrated as well. Okay, Judy, I have one more question for you before we go, and that is, why Mohara for the novel's cover? You know, I have my
Oh,
own read
that's
on
a
this,
question.
but you know, the novel, the novel in capital letters is an inherently static quality, and Mohara's art is pop and it's vibrant and it's animated and it's the antithesis of a white paper with black words on it. So I'm curious what led to that collaboration and why.
When I decided to do it as an NFT, of course, like I had to think of an artist, and I swear I think it took me 3 seconds to land on Mohara. The reason was because of dankness. Actually, the reason was because like we were laughing about it because I love his art, and I've loved his art. Like he's been drawing on Dada since like for 10 years, or I don't know when he came in, like maybe 2015 or 2016. And he has this amazing combination that is like extremely elegant line, like, but he can draw farts and people pooping, and like he can draw like the most like vulgar damn content, but the way it's done is it's delicate. It's really, really, he has an amazing, he's incredibly talented. So we called it elegant but vulgar, or in Mexican slang, guacala que rico. It's like ew, delicious kind of thing. So the reason why I also thought of Mox is because he has a great sense of humor, and I think that the novel also has a lot of humor in it. And so I felt that his style was perfect. Also because he understands. I mean, he's from Mexico, and he understands. I mean, it was kind of like it doesn't have to be that it had to be someone necessarily from Mexico, but Mox, as I call him, understands the culture. He has a great sense of humor, and he has that quality of great delicacy, but at the same time, like one of the illustrations he did for the those bubbles that float on the index is
Yeah.
like it's a used condom. I didn't tell him. I said, just take things from, like, take like little objects that are in the chapters. You figure it out. And so there's like a line of Coke on a credit card, and there's like a gun or whatever. But then, like, all of a sudden, like, out of the corner, I'm like, what the fuck is that? And it's like, it's this used condom. So I love that. So that's why. Yeah, and I don't agree necessarily with the static thing. I think that, yes, I mean, we made the cover to be super poppy, and he, like this guy, I mean, he did this beautiful job. In fact, we ended up using his design for the cover of the paper book. But without the naked lady, because we thought that we couldn't be selling it in bookstores. But I think that we wanted to kind of like present kind of the excitement of the novel, and then just get into this story. But the story, I believe, is not static. The story just takes you through this kind of wild journey of these two characters, no?
Absolutely. Yeah, I guess just aesthetically was my point, but that was a wonderful answer.
Thank you.
I'm out of questions. Personally, Coborn, is there anything you'd like to ask before we shove off out of here?
I mean, a million things, but we don't have enough time for that.
Oh,
Fair enough. Judy, we'll have to have you back in the podcast to
please
talk about a
do,
million more
please
things
do.
Coborn wants to talk about. Thank you so much for your insight, for these answers. This was such a fun conversation. Thank you to everyone who was listening. We really appreciate you being here with us. This will be up as a podcast on Friday. If you're watching this with us on a Wednesday, if you like what you heard, perhaps you really like what we do, we'd love if you'd give us a follow or a subscribe on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. Leave us a 5-star rating. Put out a Substack column today, as we do every Wednesday, our Dear MOCA column, which Judy last week told me that she really
I
loves.
love it. I love those questions. I love it. Love it.
And you can get that in your own inbox if you visit us at museumofcrypto.substack.com, which we'd really appreciate that you do. Judy, give us some last words before we end tonight's session?
Well, thank you for having me. And the book is coming out. You were asking me, do we have a firm date? It's coming out very soon. We're still tinkering with some display issues that we're doing on testing, but it's ready. You saw the galleys. I call it the galleys. It's a beautiful object. And stay tuned, everyone, for when we announced. I would love for everyone to read it.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'm about halfway through. I had to message Judy the other day and say this chapter was so horrifying and so masterfully written. Would you say horrifying is the goal? Or
Yeah, no. I
horrifying?
said if it was horrifying, I did my job. That's music to my ears.
Yeah, it's incredible. We're looking forward to the release. I'm very excited. Gypsy Lou in our chat said Judy's a rock star. Cold War Max, you're both legends. I don't know about that. Definitely the two of them. We will be back soon with another episode of MOCA Live. So thank you again, everyone, for being with us, and we will see you all real soon.